Hi, and welcome to Answers News for Monday, January 22nd, 2021. I'm Avery Foley. I'm here with Roger Patterson and Brian Osborne.
Hey, guys.
And I am totally impressed you didn't say 2020. We've already moved into 2021.
Hey, I'm getting there. I still have to pause in my brain for half a second and be like, wait.
Oh, yeah.
But 2020 was such a year that I think I'm really happy to embrace that it's 2021. So, yeah. So I got a couple things to talk about here as people jump on. First thing I want to mention is Answers Magazine. If you're not a subscriber to Answers Magazine, I encourage you to do so. It's a family biblical worldview magazine. So really will help your entire family build a more biblical worldview. Looks at some of the stuff that's current happenings in science and culture through the lens of Scripture. Has really fascinating articles on a host of different subjects. The issue that's currently hitting mailboxes is about the new Fearfully and Wonderfully Made exhibit, kind of behind the scenes, looking at some of the interesting details there. And one really cool thing is they just doubled the size of the kids magazine. So if you're like me and you have young kids, that's awesome news.
Yeah.
My son
and
Ian is excited.
I hear that some guy named Mr. P is going to have like a science experiment in every issue.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah,
So
some Mr.
watch
P
out for
guy.
those.
Yeah, so
Harry's
that's
kinda tall.
something fun to do with with your kids. But yeah, so be sure to check that out. You can go to answersmagazine.org to subscribe and get all the information about that. The other thing we want to mention, as people are getting on, is Answers TV. Another thing that you can subscribe to if you have not subscribed to Answers TV.
Shame on you first.
Right? You could be watching this show from Answers TV. And so I encourage you to check that out. We have all of our live streams go up on there. You can stream conferences. You can stream shows like Unlocking Science, which is an awesome show. You can stream an even better show, which is called Shoes Off.
Fun for the
Wait,
littles.
whose show is that?
Well, I might be in it. My husband and I might have written it and directed it and produced it and filmed it and everything.
Yeah.
But that's for little kids, a little bit different age bracket than Roger's show, but it's for kids 3 to 7. So there's lots of great stuff on there. We're just waiting for Brian to come up with his own show idea. Come on, Brian.
I just teach the Bible. I'm sorry.
This was supposed to be your plug for Building Blocks.
That's true. Oh, well, you're in that show too.
Well, yeah, but I was going to let you talk.
There's a Building Block show as well that goes with our Answers Bible Curriculum Homeschool Edition, which we're excited about. I made videos for the Sunday School edition of ABC Curriculum. That's on there as well. There really is so much available that's safe for the entire family. Your kids can go, they can roam around, look at different shows. They can watch Singing by Buddy Davis or kid shows like Shoes Off, or for the teens, Roger shows. I mean, we've got lectures for the adults. There's so much on there. You will enjoy it. The family will enjoy it, and you can use it in a church setting, a small group setting. You're allowed to
That's
do
one thing
so.
I love about it. There isn't
Absolutely.
limits to how many people can view the video, so you can just take it, show it to your church, show it to your small group, Bible study, which is awesome, homeschool group. So I encourage you to check that out, Answers.tv. You can try a 7-day trial for free. All right, our next item here is our Fluff item. It's a little crazy.
I've not seen this yet. I'm excited.
Is holding a knife. So 2021 is getting off to a start with the squirrel.
And we can't fail to mention this is in Toronto, Canada.
This is in Canada.
So even the squirrels are crazy up there.
It makes sense. It's in Canada.
Yeah, why not? I guess I'm not really sure what the squirrel's plan was. I don't know if I want to know what the squirrel's plan was, but you can see there in the video, it legit has a knife-wielding squirrel.
Now, I have seen crabs do this before.
Right.
Some little videos of crabs who have grabbed a steak knife at a beachside restaurant or something, and he's walking around with the knife in his claw. And you're wondering whether he's
not going to be dinner.
assault somebody.
Well, now the squirrels are taking tips from the crabs, I guess. They're wielding knives now. So if you're in Toronto, be aware.
Maybe they're threatening the homeowner, you will refill the bird feeder because I'm hungry.
Yes.
And this is why I always take a rifle when I go squirrel hunting, not a knife.
Just in
To quell the
case.
uprising. That's right, yes.
All right. Our first one here comes from Evolution News and Science Today. New proposal could deny accreditation to religious colleges based on science.
Can we go back to the squirrel? Can we just camp there for a while?
So this is talking about a proposal from the Human Rights Campaign. Right now, the U.S. Department of Education has what's called the Higher Education Opportunity Act, which basically means that schools can't be refused accreditation based on their religious beliefs. There needs to be freedom for schools to actually operate within their religious beliefs, which Makes complete sense. But this particular proposal is saying, no, we shouldn't do that.
And it flips everything on its head because the language is that it's going to ensure non-discrimination policies and science-based curricula are not undermined by religious exemptions and accreditation standards. But that's the whole point of what they're trying to do, is to silence the viewpoints that they don't agree with. And so now it's part of the human rights of everyone on the planet to be indoctrinated by a certain view, and we've got to withhold all of the dangerous views that are contrary to science-based education.
And who defines what that is? I mean, science is supposed to be, discourse of ideas. But if you're saying you can only teach this certain view, then that's anti-science, really. It doesn't allow for that. And then they talk, of course, about schools that discriminate. Well, you can read into that what that means. It's definitely going to be about LGBTQ. Your school discriminates on the basis of that with their students and faculty.
And the wording's interesting. They say the act should not require the accreditation of religious institutions that do not meet neutral accreditation standards, including non-discrimination policies and scientific curriculum requirements.
And by neutral, you mean?
By neutral, they mean their view. Right?
It's not neutral.
There is no neutrality. They are enforcing, they're in a tyrannical way, in an oppressive way, they're forcing their views. You must adopt our views about sexuality, gender, origins, if you want to be accredited. And to actually be a school, you must be accredited.
Right, yeah.
So this is a lot of leverage they have over these schools to force their view.
And ideas have consequences too. What you believe about origins, what you believe about some of these different scientific questions has real life consequences. If you think about, for example, just as one example, embryonic stem cell research. If you believe that is a human life that is being destroyed in that research, then that's going to be very different in how you do research than someone who just doesn't care about that and doesn't believe it's a person and ignores that. So the ideas have consequences. And when they try and squelch out certain ideas, well, that's going to have real life consequences. And that's going to be reflected in different practices.
And rather than having open debate and open dialogue about these things and having the academic rigor to examine all types of different views, what we've seen happening, especially on college campuses, even ones that are traditionally religious campuses, places, think of a lot of the Catholic universities, they're shutting down this discourse, and you're only allowed to present things from the one side. And if you're not, then you're not on the right side of history, this vague, nebulous phrase,
According
which they
to
get to define however they want to.
And I want to read this last paragraph in totality because it's so good. It's from the author who's coming from a Christian perspective and kind of in relation to what you just said. He said, finally, the proposal exhibits insecurity on their part, the secular part, rather than confidence. Confessional religious institutions are a small fraction of the total colleges and universities in the United States, but apparently protecting their diversity of thought is too dangerous to permit. It's almost as if those making the proposal fear they can't prevail in debates over scientific issues, even against a handful of institutions. Are their own arguments so weak, is his final statement. And they truly are, because their own arguments are rooted in an anti-biblical, actually anti-science worldview based in secular philosophy, and so they must force their views to get them passed.
This next one comes from New Scientist. Fossilized nests show some dinosaurs sat on their eggs like birds do. So if I was writing this headline, I would rewrite this headline to say, fossilized nest shows that what were likely birds sat on their eggs like birds do.
You mean calling a bird a dinosaur doesn't make it a dinosaur?
Not necessarily.
If I call Roger a giraffe, is he not a giraffe?
Just because I'm tall doesn't mean I'm a giraffe.
So this is talking about a fossilized oviraptor, which is likely a bird. And it was found fossilized sitting on top of a clutch of eggs, which is the first time that's been found. They've found clutches of eggs before. They've found individuals sort of in relative proximity to nests, but they've never found one actually on top of a nest. So based on that, as well as an analysis of the eggs and what temperature the eggs were being incubated at, they believe this is actually a creature sitting on its nest, which is pretty neat because we don't find behavior preserved in the fossil record very often. So that's
and that's a way that we can definitely interpret this. As we think about other deposits of eggs that have been examined from dinosaurs and other types of creatures, there are likely other explanations for some of those, as these animals were depositing their eggs under a stressful situation with the flood happening, the turmoil all around them. They deposit this clutch of eggs, and then they're trying to flee and save their own lives. And that type of behavior is not unreasonable, and we see things like that in the animal world today. So sometimes these interpretations are going to be pretty valid, and this one seems like it might be appropriate to say this was the creature that's on top of here incubating these. We can look at the embryos using various CT technology and be able to scan
really cool.
inside of those, which is
Which is
really
neat.
cool.
And that's good science.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and look at the development of those
Absolutely.
embryos. Here's an egg that has the embryo of the same creature that's on top of it fossilized. But how does that happen, Brian? What are the processes that have to happen to get something like that frozen in time?
Well, you'd have to bury something very quickly and actually pretty deeply to protect it from being scavenged after it died, from decomposition, which requires a rapid process, which essentially is how you have to make any fossil for the most part. It's got to be
Right,
a
yeah.
rapid burial to make a fossil, which requires a pretty catastrophic situation. And again, as Roger, you just said, we've got to be careful to tell the difference between interpretation and fact. Now, there's some probably good interpretations here, but ironically enough, even the name Oviraptor was kind of a false interpretation of the original evidence,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
Because the name
yeah.
itself means egg thief.
Yeah, because they thought this fossil that they found close to this nest was caught in the act of stealing the eggs.
Right.
But then as we were able to look inside the eggs and see them with different scanning technology, it was revealed they're probably the same species. And so this may have been the mother associated with the nest or the father associated with the nest and incubating those things.
So got to be real careful with that separation of those two things, interpretation and facts.
Yeah, but a really unique find that really just confirms the catastrophic nature of the flood, that these fossils were buried catastrophically. So quickly, this bird was preserved sitting on its nest, which is pretty
Pretty
neat.
wild if you think about it, yeah.
All right, this next one comes from Discern. Report, killing of Christians increased 60% in 2020,
Wow.
mostly due to Islamic violence in Nigeria. So this hasn't been widely reported on in the news. I think we've talked about it a couple times here on Answers News, but a lot of Christians have been slaughtered, particularly in Nigeria over the past year, as well as previous years to that. And so in 2020, that number was up 60% from 2019 as these Islamic extremists in Nigeria are going into villages and killing Christians and burning their homes. And some pretty awful stuff is happening to our brothers
This is
and
all
sisters.
being reported and compiled by Open Doors USA. It's an organization that tries to examine these types of persecutions that are going on around the globe and catalog them and bring them to people's attention. And as we think about some of the genocides that have happened over the decades of recent memory, we can't help but look at what's happening in Nigeria right now and call this a religious genocide, because it is the Christian villagers and villages and communities that are being singled out and attacked. They're not being supported by their government against these Muslim militias and others. We see the same types of things happening in India and in China. These religious cleansings are happening where they're trying to, think especially of China with the Uyghur Muslims.
Yeah.
That's the state trying to obliterate a ethnic group and who have typically a Muslim religious background, and to remove those things. So as we see those things happening, even to people who aren't Christians, it's religious persecution. And if they're going to do it to one group, they're going to do it to another. And we're always going to have this infighting back and forth between different ethnicities and different religious groups. We see that in India and Pakistan a lot with Christians and Hindus and those conflicts.
Well, ideas have consequences, and bad ideas have victims. Right?
Yeah.
And we see that again and again. We see it in our own culture different ways. And the fact that Christians are being persecuted really should not surprise any Christian.
no,
right? We're told from God's word numerous times that you'll be persecuted in this life. We should expect that. So this is an affirmation of the truth of God's word. We should expect this, and then we use this for God's glory. No matter what situation you're in, trust God. He'll use it for his glory and ultimately our good if we trust him in this. And that's an amazing thing to kind of hold on to. Even if we endure persecution at multiple levels, I mean, these people are giving their life, the ultimate
martyred.
sacrifice. But God will use it for his glory and their good for eternity. And we cling to that truth.
Yeah, and let's try to be people of prayer and remembering these things that are happening. We're here in the United States, we're facing some of these increasing persecution, but it's pretty mild compared to what we see in these other places where there's loss of life. Both are still forms of persecution. So as we face these things, let's remember and be prayerful for those people who are facing much harsher realities.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, this next one comes from New Scientist. Embryos set to be implanted in the last 2 northern white rhinos. So northern white rhinos are a subspecies of rhino related to the southern white rhinos, and there are only 2 female white rhinos northern white rhinos in existence. The last male died a little while ago.
2018, I believe, yeah.
And
Yeah.
all that's left is this mother and daughter. And so they're going to try and artificially inseminate one of the, or both of the.
They're actually doing an implantation. So
right.
they've created the embryos in dish.
They have 2 viable embryos.
In vitro. They're going to implant those then into these 2 females with the hope of restoring the species. Now, this is a pretty tenuous project, just because the process of implantation, embryo implantation, is pretty risky. It's not a high success rate, especially in rhinos. We use it in cattle and things like that as well. But
and they only have 2.
yeah,
2
with only
embryos.
2 of these, it's going to be very tricky. Now, they still have some of the male's sperm set aside for doing these things in the future, but this is pretty small population anyway. And it's got to cause us to stop and ask some questions about the amount of resources that we spend on this one subspecies of rhino. Now, rhinos are beautiful, amazing creatures that God's made. Don't hear me saying they're not important, but this is one subspecies that's so similar to the other. They only differ by their range, basically. And is it worth, the question I'm asking, is it worth to spend all of these resources and time?
Aren't they guarded
to
24
cover
hours
Under
by
24-hour
armed
guard,
guards?
yeah.
Which is
And
a lot
have
of money
been for a long
resources right
time.
there. And I've got another question too. Those are all great questions we should really think about away from a biblical perspective. Here's my other question. Well, in the evolutionary worldview, extinction kind of is the rule, natural selection, things die out. These rhinos obviously can't survive on their own. They should be deleted. Why not let them die in the
But
evolutionary worldview?
humans are a scourge on the animal world, and we're the ones who have killed them off, and we're the problem.
But isn't that still natural selection in action?
Well, if we're part of nature, that would be,
Yep.
yeah. So if you try to be consistent from that perspective, you run into all kinds of roadblocks.
And by the way, the fact that these people do care, it's right they care. They should care, right, to a certain level. But the fact they do care is a very biblical value. The Bible tells us to care for creation, to be good stewards of what God has given us. So it makes sense in biblical worldview to do all we can within reason to care for creation. So they're actually borrowing kind of biblical values when they do this. If you know.
Yeah, Roger brought up a good point about like how much resources we divert to saving one particular species. You know, could we divert those resources to maybe saving the southern white rhinos, where there's a population of 20,000, a much bigger population to work with? There's a lot of different questions because obviously as Christians we want to care for creation.
Absolutely.
We have the right foundation to care for creation. We should, if we start with God's word, have the right perspective regarding humans being made in the image of God and being given dominion over creation. So we have to talk through some of these and work through these different issues. A really great place to start is with the book A Different Shade of Green by Dr. Gordon Wilson, which we sell in our online bookstore. Excellent book looking at environmentalism through the lens of scripture and the dominion mandate and how do we care for creation. It gives some good big picture principles. We also had an issue of Answers Magazine, just to plug Answers Magazine again, Creation Care, which even had an article that talked about species that are going extinct and how much we should go to saving those species. Excellent article to check out, so I encourage you to look at that issue.
By the way, real quick, this was in Kenya, correct?
I believe so, yes.
I believe it was Kenya. By the way, I've been to Kenya.
Gotta bring that in.
Hey to my friends over in Kenya. But here's my question. So over in Kenya, all the people there are in good situations with good housing. They got plenty of food.
Not so much.
I don't think so. And that's what's prompting me to ask these questions. Is this the best way? And I know we could argue from different perspectives, but I'm saying let's have the conversation and let's think through these things. Is preserving this one subspecies and its biodiversity really worth all of those things that are going to be lost, the resources that are put there that could have gone toward human flourishing and helping those people in those situations?
And it's really the balancing in a biblical worldview. We don't want to go too far one way. We don't want to go too far the other way. We have to have that lens of scripture to keep us grounded and to help us have a proper perspective of human life and a proper perspective of dominion, for sure. This next one, also talking kind of about the environment. New Scientist, lush meadows of underwater seagrass are removing plastic from the sea. So when I first saw this headline, I was like, That's super cool. This seagrass must be like absorbing the plastic or something.
Integrating it into its leaves.
Yeah, I was like, what? How? And then I read through the article, and it turns out it's not quite what the headline said.
Still
I mean,
neat.
Technically the headline is accurate, but what's really happening is the seagrass naturally sheds its leaves and creates these like balls that tend to trap.
Yeah, they roll around in the waves and they wad up into little balls.
And they tend to trap plastic particles inside. And then when there's a storm, they get tossed up onto the beach. And that's how it's ridding the ocean of plastic.
So the ocean is throwing our trash back at us.
It's throwing the trash back at us. Now, Brian, this is in the Mediterranean Sea. Have you ever been to the Mediterranean Sea?
Yeah,
I have not been to the Mediterranean Sea.
have.
Oh, look at that.
I got it. I finally got it. But this is a very interesting phenomenon. As we think about what's happening with plastics entering the waterways and things, that should concern us as Christians. We should say, ooh, this is a bad thing. We're not caring for the planet. We're not being good stewards of those things. And we should be looking for ways to limit that type of plastic waste and storing it securely where it's not going to get into these waterways and situations. We should be wise about those things. We shouldn't be flippant about these. And thinking about it from a neighborly perspective, if I'm throwing my trash all over and it's blowing around the neighborhood, then it's landing in my neighbor's yard and they have to deal with those consequences. So there are lots of ways we could look at this and give a biblical perspective on the litter and the trash being a bad thing. We don't want to pollute the environment like that. But this is kind of an interesting way where God's creation could kind of be protecting itself from that abuse that humans are putting through that excessive pollution and spitting that stuff back at us. And a way that we could actually take some of that back, collect that when it comes back on the land and dispose of those types of things properly.
So, yeah, I thought that just was really interesting. I was like, the headline really caught my attention. And I was like, oh, this is... Oh, well, interesting. All right, so this next one, Roger said he wanted to talk about for the entire episode, but you only have about 9 minutes.
So we put it to the end. You're welcome.
Well, just the image itself, I was just mesmerized by the image there.
The image
totally charmed by that image.
You were charmed by the image. Oh. CRISPR gene editing urgently needs an off switch. Now we have one. So we've talked multiple times on the show about CRISPR, basically like molecular scissors that can go in and clip out parts of the genome and put different letters in. And it has some potential for some harm, which we've talked about as well. Like, is it just making changes to the one part they wanted it to make changes to, or is it making changes to other parts of the genome? How do you control it? Things like that. And now researchers are saying, well, maybe we can use viruses to control CRISPR. So, Roger, talk away.
Now, this is a very interesting concept because when
Avery, you want to go out and just relax for a little bit?
We'll get a coffee. We'll be right back.
Oh, you guys can hang out with me. So if we think about what an enzyme does, it acts as a biological catalyst. So these enzymes are going in, they're performing a function, they're coming out, and now they're able to do that function again, over and over and over and over. So as Avery mentioned, if we insert these things into a living organism, and that does its function in the liver cells. Okay, let's say we have some type of protein disorder in the liver, and we're going to go in and change that. We're going to edit the genes in those cells, and we're going to send in the corrected copy that will correct the mutation, and it does its job there. Okay? Now, that same DNA segment is in every other cell in your body. So now if it gets carried through the bloodstream to your brain or your heart, then it can be doing those same types of replacements in those areas. And what effects is that going to have? And what about a similar spot that has a similar sequence and it binds into that spot and causes those problems? So these are the questions that these bioethicists have been asking about the use of these tools in organisms, especially humans. Should we be doing this? And there have been some successful things. There was a blind man who had that mutation corrected in his eyes recently, and that was a beneficial outcome of this, ways that we're actually reversing the effects of the curse and restoring some of those things. But how do we stop it? If it keeps going through the body, we need this off switch.
And we don't know long-term effects. And the whole system is so intricate. We talk about DNA, the genome. We hardly know anything. We know next to nothing really about how complicated it truly is. And we're learning more all the time, but we still know next to nothing. And so messing with what we don't fully understand can be very dangerous, right? So we got to be very careful. Yes, we need to fight back against the results of the fall and the curse if we
It's
can.
very exciting
That is good
technology.
to do. That could be awesome, but we got to be
But
so
with
careful.
caution, yeah.
Yeah, so this is actually found naturally in bacteria,
Right.
and that's how we've identified it. And the enemy of bacteria are viruses that we call phages, and these things are in this, from the evolutionary perspectives presented here, they're in this evolutionary arms race of
Right.
trying to take one over. So the bacteria has a mutation that helps it block the virus, and so then the virus gains a mutation that helps it fight back against the blocked section of the bacterial DNA, and they're going back and forth in all of these things. And that switch has actually been found in that natural occurrence. And there was an interesting line in here that said, nature has already given us this, nature has already designed the switch for us.
I was about to interrupt you and read it.
Okay, read it.
You said it.
Let's
says,
get the quote.
Well, it literally says, nature has already designed an anti-CRISPR.
Okay,
Right.
so it's got the shut-off switch already designed for
So
us.
nature has a mind. It makes plans. It does designs.
Very
it
convenient of
creates.
nature.
I think it was probably God who did that in the
I
first
would
place.
think so.
Yeah.
Right?
And so these are all part of God's biomatrix. We think about how bacteria have so many beneficial functions, and viruses actually have beneficial functions, and viruses can help keep the bacterial populations under control. This is all part of God's intricate design for his creation. And so if we can use some of those things to bring benefit to humanity, let's do that. But let's do it so carefully and so cautiously, especially because we're going to be doing this on individuals who are created in the image of God.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
let's not abuse those things. Let's don't start playing God to try and create the type of humanity that we want.
Yes,
But
which is another
let's-
fear a lot of people
yeah,
have.
let's try
designer
to
baby type
bring
idea.
some relief to people who are suffering from dreadful diseases that are a result of sin entering in the world through Adam.
And we have to keep a biblical worldview in mind, even as we try and bring relief to those diseases, because a lot of the experiments with CRISPR have been done on embryos. And that's destroying the life of a human who's made in the image of God, and saying that we'll sacrifice these lives to maybe make some scientific advancements that might help these people. That's not the right way of going about it. We need to protect all human life, recognizing human lives are made in the image of God and have infinite value.
And you could affect multiple generations with this as you muck around with the DNA that's passed down from one generation to the
Yeah,
next. So,
with
I
germ
mean,
cells.
there's some big consequences if we're not careful. And I just want to give just two more quotes from the paper that just showed the inherent inconsistency of the evolutionary worldview. Towards the end of the article, they said this: the defense mechanism that bacteria have evolved in response to the viruses that infect them is ingenious. But again, they don't create, they don't think.
Random chance
Right.
is ingenious.
Happenings are ingenious.
And then one last one.
So close.
It probably took thousands of years for bacteria to evolve CRISPR. It requires huge genetic innovation.
But wait.
What creates brand new genetic information? Oh, that
Right?
There's no
That's never been
process that
observed.
we've observed for that.
it's almost like what Romans 1 says about how it's obvious from creation that God has made everything. Almost
so
like that's true.
As you think about this, like the application of what we observe, that's good operational science, but the origin of these things we're using from the secular perspective, that's historical science rooted in a false worldview.
Yeah. And these are great opportunities to start conversations
That's
that
right.
can point out some of those flaws and ultimately point people to not hope in science, not hope in innovation and technology, but to hope in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's ultimately where our hope should lie. All right, this next one comes from Fox News. NASA finds there are fewer galaxies than first thought, leaving the possibility we're alone in the universe.
That's a bit of a dramatic title.
Yeah, it's like, okay, here's the observational science. There might be less galaxies. Therefore, we have to tie it into aliens.
Because as you said earlier, when we were talking about this, no one would read the article otherwise.
Right.
Like you need a dramatic title like that to get your attention.
So this is talking about the New Horizons mission, which was, you may remember a couple years ago, that was the mission that took those highly detailed pictures of Pluto that everyone saw with like the heart and stuff. So it's continuing on past Pluto now. It's 4 billion miles away from Earth at this point.
Can we just stop for a second? That is really cool.
That is.
It's an amazing
incredible.
thing. It really is
Incredible.
neat. Just take time to enjoy that.
And now based on what they can see with this New Horizons technology, they believe that they've actually estimated the number of galaxies wrongly, and maybe there's only
A few hundred billion, I think.
a
it is.
few hundred billion instead of 2 trillion.
So taking the Hubble deep field images and others, they've basically extrapolated that data and said, all right, if we can see this much light, then there must be other stars and other galaxies. Even though we can't see half of the light that we think is there. And they calculated these numbers to be in the trillions of galaxies, and each galaxy has trillions of stars in it. So
lot of stars.
the Drake equation was the equation that the evolutionary view comes up with to say, all right, if we take the chance of evolution happening and the number of planets and the number of inhabitable planets, we do this calculation, we can calculate the number of, or the likelihood of life on other planets. But if we bring that number down from trillions to a few hundred billion, then that calculation goes down.
Right, yeah.
But my biggest problem with that calculation in the first place is that if any one of those values is 0, what's 0 times anything?
That's right.
0.
Zero.
And the chance of life evolving is 0 because God is the one who's the creator of those things.
Good
So
point.
you have to have an evolutionary worldview to even
Yes.
consider that calculation a reasonable way to look at the universe.
Which is self-affirming.
Sure.
Right, circular. Yep. But it is sad for the secularists. They think no more aliens. We know from biblical worldview, probably not out there to begin with anyway, right? But this makes sense in a biblical perspective.
Well, that's all the time that we have for today, but we hope you'll join us again for our next episode.
See you guys.
See ya.